Hello, BookTube. In advance of Winter Storm Ezekiel, I actually went out first thing this morning and went up the street to the bodega to get the New York Sunday Times. I haven't done that in quite some time. I used to make a New York Sunday Times, I think all summer I did it, where I got the Sunday Times and went through it with you. And of course the creamy sugar, the joy at the end of that journey is the New York Times book review, which is a standalone pull-out section that is the pinnacle of the book reviewing profession. It's the highest profile place you can go, either as a reviewer or as a reviewed book. And I was doing these videos sort of in conjunction with David Murphy, who was going through the Wall Street Journal, or the Wall Street Journal the same way, the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal, and of course the creamy treat at the end of his journey was the Fiction Chronicle by none other than Sam Sachs. David doesn't make many videos anymore. He seems to be fading rapidly into that weird category of booktubers we have, booktubers who we still talk about in the present tense, even though they don't make videos anymore. But I had the feeling this morning, I think all of Boston has the feeling of something impending. The forecast notwithstanding, the air outside now definitely feels like some sort of weather is on the way, and it doesn't feel like approaching rain. So the morning, the whole day is predicted to be clear, and so I went out. I went out to the shop, talked with the shop owner. We both had a good laugh over the shop's cat. He keeps a cat in the bodega because it's great at killing mice. And like all cats everywhere, it has a weird fascination with curling up into contorted spaces as long as the space is a cardboard box. What the cat fascination with cardboard boxes is, I do not know. I've never met a cat owner who could tell me. And sure enough, behind the counter, his store's cat was crammed into a tiny little box. And you would think, you know, maybe it's stuck, or maybe the creature miscalculated, but no, the cat was clearly blissful. So anyway, I got the New York Times. I thought we'd go through it together, and we'll finish up the book review. So we won't do the whole thing, and we'll just do a little bit. I'll try to keep, these videos always go long. I'll try to keep this one manageably short, especially since my mail hauls, for some reason, have been going enormously long on this channel. No idea why. So we deal, first of all, with the front section of the New York Times. It's a big, boring picture, but the front page of the New York Times is a big deal in legacy journalism circles, especially above the fold. That's what this is. And it used to be that you got these things on a newsstand or in a newspaper dispenser, a machine where you put in something called a coin and you got your newspaper. And because of, in both those venues, the newspapers were folded, this is all you got to see, was what was above the fold. And over the years, in newspaper parlance, in the newspaper mind frame, that took on a very great deal of importance. Not just a question of what stories would you put on the front page, but what would you put on the front page above the fold? Which makes the presence of an enormous 5-column wide photo, and they do this every time, an absolute obscenity. But, I mean, you've already decided to buy the Sunday New York Times, and if you haven't, that picture is not going to make you do it. So I don't know why that still holds. But there are basically two main stories above the fold. The first one is about Amazon, the giant retailer Amazon, creeping into an American city, and that dovetailed with a whole week of watching PBS NewsHour up in Vermont, where they had a running series about Amazon and its iniquities. But the other front page story is this one here. How a Navy SEAL gained the favor of a president. And it's about Edward Gallagher, who is a disgraced Navy SEAL who killed an unarmed non-combatant boy while he was on deployment, and then posed with his dead body. Now, he was acquitted of killing the boy. I have no idea how. There were 10 eyewitnesses. So I have no idea how he isn't rotting in Leavenworth right now. But there's no way to acquit somebody of social media. He bragged ahead of time, before his deployment, that he was hungry to kill people, and that he hoped that he would get a chance to kill them. Not if they were firing at him, but just if they were near him. He wanted to kill people. And then he did. The boy was totally incapacitated when Gallagher decided to murder him in front of all of his men, just assuming, you know, that nothing would come of it. And then he posed with the dead body and bragged about that as well on social media. The social media is where he posted it, for Pete's sake. In other words, he's a psychopathic monster. He's a homicidal maniac who just happens to be a Navy SEAL. And the Navy knew that perfectly well. They wanted him gone. They wanted to wash him out of anything to do with them. They're perfectly happy. The Navy is perfectly happy to employ people who are perfectly capable of killing. But they don't actually want to employ killers. There's a distinction. And they don't want to do that. They recognized, everyone, all the way up the chain of command in the Navy, recognized that this guy is, a hideous freak of nature. He's got his wiring wrong. He's a psychopathic, homicidal maniac. And a sadist as well. He posed with a dead body. You want to be able to say, if you're in the Navy brass, you want as soon as possible to be able to say, he's not one of us. We disavow him. They haven't quite been able to do that, but the machinery was in motion until Donald Trump, the President of the United States, decided to intervene. Thought this guy was being treated very unfairly. His classic whining phrase. Treated very unfairly. And now wants all of that reversed. Wants all of it done, no, you won't do anything. You won't touch this guy. The President of the United States wants to campaign with this monster. He thinks having him on stage and hugging him and having them both wave red American flags and talk to the audience will help him with his base. And in that, I think he is probably 100% correct. But it's beyond the pale. It's the whole story is just utterly beyond the pale. And that was how I started my New York Times. And I have to say, for those of you who might be wondering what the pressy is here, kind of a negative thing ran throughout. This was a negative reading of the Times. Usually it's not. Usually it's a great sigh of relief to read this thing. Like for instance, the Sunday Review section, was the next one we'll look at, has a long piece by Annalee Nuits. The Sunday Review, the Sunday Review section is opinions. This is where you will find Maureen Dowd, this and in the Pliocene level of your local tar pit. And the Annalee Nuits here writes about reforming social media, about what happens. She starts out by blandly assuming that social media is utterly corrosive, utterly out of control, entirely negative, and then moves on from that as if that were just assumed, and goes on to say not only what can be reshaped as an alternative to social media, but what we'll do in a post-social media landscape. And it's a long piece. It's all along the front section here, and then it goes all the way along on the inside. And I read the whole thing. I read it word for word, as an old friend of mine used to say about the Sunday Times. He used to say, I read it word for word. And you're going to see my objection coming right away. The thing, I don't know, what was her name? Annalee Nuits? Annalee Nuits. I have no idea who she is. Does it tell us who she is? She's a contributing opinion writer and author, most recently, of The Future of Another Timeline. I don't know anything about her. I haven't seen interviews with her or anything like that. But the only people who ever write articles like this are what is now popularly known derisively as SJWs, social justice warriors. People who want to scold the world into better shape than it's in right now. And just seeing the premise that she starts with, which is, of course, unfounded, gave me the impression that that's what she was, that was the tack that she was going to take in her piece. And this, I don't know how up you are on social justice warriors. I'm hoping not much, because the first thing that you're going to encounter with these people, long before you encounter it with their enemy, their great enemy is the so-called alt-right, and long before the alt-right even thinks about one particular thing, their SJW nemesis will be heartily advocating it, and that thing is censorship. There is no SJW. There is no, as it's popularly known, there is no progressive SJW idea or social plan that cannot be done without first giving them and no one else massive censorship abilities. They want to silence speech, variety, expression of all kinds under the rubric that it is quote-unquote harmful. Speech is not harmful, ever, under any circumstances, to anyone. But nevertheless, they want to do that, and when I started this article, I know, well, okay, you might not do it on the front page of the opinion section, but when I read you past the jump and I get into the guts and the bolts of your piece, a large part of what you're writing about is going to rest completely on censorship. And it does. And it was revolting to see, because I can't be the only one who saw that in reading the whole of that article. Granted, it's enormously bloated in length, but some editor at the Times had to see it. Why didn't some editor at the Times step back and say, okay, well, some of the thoughts in here are interesting, but the huge bulk of this opinion piece of yours could be lifted from the New York Times in 2019 without alteration and placed in a German newspaper in the late 1930s. The huge bulk of it could be. You are advocating silencing your opponents. You're misty-eyedly dreaming about a world, the world that would result once you get your way. Without ever seeming, the people who advocate this sort of crap don't ever seem to think, well, your enemies want to silence you. How would you feel if they succeeded? Anyway, ironically enough, probably this was planned. A lot of planning goes into the New York Sunday Times. It's a massive endeavor. It involves a lot of people. But the Sunday Styles section, which is the other section I want to talk to you about, ironically enough, had an article that dovetailed very closely with that long piece about revamping and then replacing social media. And it's this. It's a long piece called Boy Disconnected. It was very good. The piece is by Taylor Lorentz. And it's about a kid named Rowan Winch, who's just a teenager, and sought clout, which, for those of you old fogies, clout is the currency of the internet. It's the currency of social media. And it's the ability to get your way. It's the ability to be known. It's the ability, these people always put it in one particularly horrible way. And actually, Rowan Winch does put it this way in the course of this article. They say, I want to be able to collaborate with my idols. Which does not mean that. It means you want to be able to boss Kobe Bryant around. It means you want to be able to have equal time on some internet feature with Taylor Swift or whoever it is, whoever the idol is. It's never, I want to be able to say hi and have them return my email. It's always more than that, because clout is not exactly fame, but no one who wants clout doesn't want fame. They are the same. In that regard, they are almost identical. But it doesn't always involve money, although I can't help but notice that most of the people seeking clout also want money. Lots of it. They want to monetize their lives. That is the Generation Z dream come true. It is not find something to do that's monetizable. It's find a way to monetize the stuff I already do. Find a way so that just me rolling out of bed, playing video games until 4 in the afternoon, and then having tacos can make me $10,000 a week. And this kid achieved that. He, as far as I could tell, I did not know about him before I read this piece. And as far as I can tell, he spent years, every waking minute of his day, creating some sort of meme farm. And it developed a huge following. And the gist of the piece, the turning point that I think gave genesis to the piece, is that at one point, he did it on Instagram, and at one point Instagram just decided to terminate that account. And it rocked little Rowan. It shook his self-confidence. He was connecting with so many people. The article goes on in a greasy kind of way, and it's a long piece, and it goes on at the end to say that really that was all he cared about, was connecting with people after having told us that he was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from this sort of stuff. I have a suspicion that meant a lot to him. That money probably meant a lot to him, but one way or another, the piece goes on. And it finishes with him contemplating what he's going to do next. It's the natural question that you have when you're reading the piece. It's quite good, but the natural question you had is, okay, well, if Instagram pulled this account and could pull any other, if in other words, your standing there is not secure, what do you plan on doing next? And I was reading along, and then I was horrified to see that he's thinking about expanding to YouTube. We had a big doors open policy, kumbaya, come to the fire, we're all one happy family. We had that policy on BookTube, and it got us Kathy Grimm and Jason Harrigan. Enough said. So maybe YouTube has room for this kid. I don't know. He's 15, and he says that his idol is PewDiePie. And he classifies what PewDiePie does as commentary. I've watched a few of PewDiePie's videos lately, a few of his most recent videos that aren't just simple video game play-alongs, that are, in fact, commentary. And did I mention we were just talking about the alt-right? This guy has a massive following. The number of his active followers is greater than the population of most countries on Earth. And he is drifting visibly closer every single day to simply declaring himself a crypto-fascist, a neo-Nazi. Almost visible movement every day. One of his most recent videos, I think it was just a month ago, was all about how, all this alt-right imagery and these alt-right memes going around online, we're really paying too much attention to them. Really, you shouldn't pay any attention to them. They're not important. Anyway, so the front section of the paper was a little disappointing. Is the short term here, is that you have, on the front page, you have the President of the United States stepping into the legal machinery that doesn't involve him, I swear, he's the last person in the country who doesn't know that commander-in-chief is not a military rank. It doesn't involve him. He's just cheesing off lifelong professionals in the Navy who have given their lives to protect this country in order to raise up and protect and lionize and make a star out of a homicidal maniac, a killer of children, posing with their dead bodies. It started with that, and then it went on from there to the evils of the internet and the wrath of the internet exacted on one teenager. So then I was happy to get to the book review, the New York Times book review, which starts off with a pair of religious-themed books, which is always interesting. There was Nicholas Kristof reviews The Lost Art of Scripture by Karen Armstrong. Which he thinks it's, in his review, he thinks it's transcendent and masterful. Magisterial, I think, is the reviewer's word he uses. It most certainly is not. But he seems to think that. Maybe doesn't get out enough. And then Elaine Pagels, reviews Melvin Connor's book, Believers, and Jack Miles' new book, Religion as We Know It. And so, between the two of them, it was a big blast of writing about religion, which is always fun. And then there was the Buy the Book section. We've commented on the Buy the Book section before. It's where the Times asks a series of questions to a different author every week and gets their answers. And I usually love reading it, because even if the authors and I disagree, I'm still going to learn a lot, and it might be fascinating. The disagreements might be fascinating. It's always fun to see where we agree as well. And this week they interview the YA novelist Tomi Adeyemi. And I knew before I read a single word that we weren't going to agree at all, and that we were going to disagree emptily. Right? I mean, that's the spectrum. You either agree emptily with someone, or you agree profitably with someone, or you disagree emptily with someone, or you disagree profitably with someone. And I knew that we were going to disagree about everything, and that it wasn't going to be any profit in it. It wasn't going to be anything that I learned. I have a strong suspicion, jumping off from earlier in this endless windbaggery, I have a strong suspicion that this author is what the alt-right would refer to as a raging SJW. Which, if true, involves an enormous amount of scolding, an enormous amount of preaching, and an enormous amount of self-absorption. An amount of self-absorption that is just off the scales. Once upon a time, the adults of 50 years ago saw the young people around them, then they were called hippies, and said, well, among the many things that I don't like about this, the two that stand out are, one, these young people have intentionally abandoned any kind of personal hygiene. They physically stink. And two, they're so self-absorbed. When we weren't like that. If we were, we quickly grew out of it in order to be part of a community. You can't be part of a community if you're relentlessly self-absorbed. You are a community unto yourself. And social media, where every one of us can have followers, has only accentuated that. I had a feeling that would be true in this case, and it was. Unfortunately, this was a buy the book that I could not enjoy at all. Like, for instance, when they ask her, have your reading taste changed over time? Now, Tomi Adeyemi answers this question, but her answer is mostly just waltzing around the ballroom. The answer to the question is no. And not because she's not intelligent or adaptable, but because hard left progressives, SJWs, view changing their opinions about anything as weakness. You can be cast out of their circles if you do that publicly. And if you do it publicly, they'll not only cast you out of their circles, but they will annihilate your name. They will try to, quote-unquote, cancel you. So the answer to this question, have your reading taste changed over time, is certainly going to be no. Instead, what's going to happen is going to be a lecture, preaching. Instead of saying, yes, my reading tastes have changed over time, it's going to be there's something wrong with your reading tastes. Just buried right below the surface, and that is exactly what I got. Her answer is, my Kindle is loaded up with several of the stories I wrote as a girl and as a teenager. It's wild reading them now. So we start off right away with self-absorption. Not only did she put those stories on her Kindle, but she reads them. She reads what she wrote when she was 8, and she doesn't scorn it. Of course not. But anyway, reading them now because I vaguely remember the nights and weekends I stayed up writing these tales, and I see the plots and character types that I've loved reading about and imagining since I was young. I've always loved sweeping romances and magical fantasies. I've loved headstrong, determined female protagonists and epic battles. I still like to read the same things. I think the difference now is that I get to read all these things I like with characters who look like me. My childhood stories didn't give me that. Even in the stories I wrote myself, I was only writing white characters and biracial characters. I didn't realize it at the time, but that erasure was painful and damaging to my sense of self. So getting to create and read stories that fight that erasure and build on my sense of self is the only significant change in my reading taste. Which is exactly what I expected to see. Her reading tastes have not changed. She's just grown more woke. She was woke to start with. Keep in mind, note the reference. She was still writing about female protagonists and biracial protagonists, but she just wasn't woke enough. And now she is. And that would be bad enough. That is, if you are reading anything, but especially fiction, if you are reading fiction in order to encounter yourself, you are doing it wrong. Plain and simple. I love the whole variety of readers. I love hearing from all of you about all the stuff that you read, even if, as I will be perfectly frank with you, I don't like the stuff myself. Because we read to increase ourselves. Not just to escape ourselves, but to increase ourselves. If you read stuff looking for yourself, you're doing it wrong. It's extremely, extremely self-absorbed. And that would be bad enough, but anyway, notice there's no way to be wrong about that, right? That's another thing that I hate about this kind of puritanical censorship, this kind of purity testing, is that by extension, if you're not reading these things, you're some sort of racist. And also, by extension, if you write something like this, something with, an all-females cast where everyone is lesbian, where everyone is bi or tri or quiracial, then your book can't be bad. The quality of the prose, the quality of your narrative structure, the pacing, none of that matters. It only matters if you check the right boxes. That kind of thinking drives me crazy. Just drives me crazy. And this is that. This answer is unfortunately a lot of that. But it does raise a question for me. Here we have what I think objectively we can call a self-absorbed author who thinks that she's never really written anything bad. Even the stories she wrote when she was a little kid are good. They're great. She still loves reading them. They're just not great enough. They're not woke enough. But there's a mention in here, to get off the soapbox for a minute, there's a mention in here, my Kindle is loaded with several stories I wrote as a girl and as a teenager. How is that possible? Those of you who have Kindles, can you put files on a Kindle? I didn't know that. How could she read her stories as a child? I assume she wasn't published as a child. I'm assuming that these are documents that she's put on her Kindle. Now, I could be wrong about that. Maybe she has been published as a child, so maybe that's what she has on there. But if not, can you add files to a Kindle? I didn't know that, and I'd love to know about it. I don't actually, at the moment, have a Kindle. And I've been kind of thinking about a Kindle Paperwhite, just to see what it'd be like to have a dedicated e-reader. But anyway, that was disappointing. The buy the book was disappointing. Ordinarily, it's not. And then there were, this is the Times is gearing up to gear down. They're getting ready to have these are the books that are it's late November, early December. It's December. That is a kind of a desert for books. So a lot of these books I have not read nor heard about. The two little religious books I had, they aren't worthy of front page treatment, but I have read them. And also there's Fintan O'Toole's book, The Politics of Pain, which only gets a half-page review. I thought it was a really good book. Really smart. Fintan O'Toole is great anyway. And he's a giant, and they got another giant to review him, Ferdinand Mount, former editor of the TLS. Why they would give him half a page buried in the book review rather than put him on the front cover and give him 30,000 words is beyond me. Mount's review was good, but I wanted a lot more of it. Then Alex von Tunzelmann, who did a book called Blood and Sand, which had at its heart the Suez Canal crisis. He reviews the book that we saw on this channel, To Begin the World Over Again, a little bit lukewarmly. I think he disliked it more than I did. I liked it a lot. Then there's a full-page review of the new biography of Frank Lloyd Wright, trying to like him. There's no way to do it. He was an a-hole. And then, before we get to the breakdowns at the back of the review, there was an essay. And the essay drew my attention because it's by Charles Finch, who writes the Charles Lennox Murder Mysteries, and is an author I really like. And he, unfortunately, his essay is hog swallowed, and he doesn't seem to realize it. If I got the impression somewhere in here that maybe he knew it, I could have swallowed it a lot better. It's about autofiction. The title of it is Autofiction for the Twitter Era. And it's all about, how we're all writing autofiction on Twitter with emojis and whatnot. But of course, when he gets to books, he has to talk about autofiction, and he goes to the two biggest examples of autofiction in the recent years, and that's Elena Ferrante and Karl Ove Knausgaard. Both of them have written long, huge reams of fiction that are indistinguishable in any way whatsoever from the details of their actual life. In Karl Ove Knausgaard's case, it's documented in every single conceivable way. Nothing in the My Struggle series was invented. So why it's called any kind of fiction, I don't care if you put auto in front of it or not, why it's called any kind of fiction is beyond me. But at one point, Finch writes, the richest example of this may be the fiction that, even from this minimal distance, seems destined to define the last decade. The work of Elena Ferrante and Karl Ove Knausgaard, and unfortunately, I think he's right about that. I think those two mountains of crap will define the first decade, or the second decade of the 20th century, of the 21st century. He claims later on in the piece, he says that all readers fell under the spell of these series. I did not. I thought I recognized them right away for the garbage that they were. And he says that he was one of the people that fell under that spell, but there's no mention made in the piece that he fell out of love, that the spell is broken. So maybe that accounts for the essay. I don't know. Then there's a page on children's books, and one of the two children's books that is mentioned here is Charlotte Bronte Before Jane Eyre. Which do I have a credit for that? I don't, right off the top of my head, remember the author, the illustrator's name. And it is not given in the piece. Okay, well, it doesn't matter. Because it was really good. Charlotte Bronte Before Jane Eyre was really good. Don't think it's for kids. Not only for kids, certainly. If it's for kids, it's one of those great kids books that is for everybody. Then we have the bestseller list, paperback and hardcover, and the roundup of books. There's always a 3-book roundup at the back. The roundup is 3 books on Leonardo da Vinci, and one of them, Leonardo by Martin Kemp, was really good. A little bit pricey. It's a big, beautiful thing, but really, really good. So I was glad about that. The other one is also Martin Kemp, and that's Leonardo da Vinci, The 100 Milestones. And then one Leonardo book that is not by Martin Kemp. That is Leonardo da Vinci Rediscovered, which is a $550 book from Yale University Press. I never got it. I don't think I ever saw it. What bookstore would have a $550 book on its shelf? What bookstore would do that? I can't imagine it. You can't put that thing out on the sales floor. It has to be behind the register. And if it's behind the register, no one can look at it. And it's a big picture book. So looking at it is a prerequisite for buying it. So I can't imagine any bookstore that would have it. And I as soon as I saw that, I thought, well, I'm in pretty tight with Yale University Press. I wonder if they'd send it to me. But that wouldn't be fair. That wouldn't be fair at all to do. So I don't think I'll even ask, especially since, like everybody else in the world, my reviewing year is all but over. So anyway, that was the New York Times today. That was the week that was. And it was if today were tomorrow, I wouldn't have gone. I think it's a certainty that there will be snow on the ground and snow falling heavy at the exact same time of early morning tomorrow that I went today. So I took advantage of the clear sidewalks. I hate the snow. I hate frozen patches of ground. I hate it when, for 6 months of winter, the ground becomes an active danger. I hate that. So that's going to happen tonight and then all for the next 2 days. But in the meantime, I'll wrap this up and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.